name is Vadim Britka, and I'm here to talk about a project at the University of Alberta that we've been working on for several years. And the idea here is to build an artificial intelligence version of a game master. So that's basically what's about. Okay, so the principal investigator of this project is my PhD student, David Tooley, who is actually in the audience here wearing a hat. And he also prepared most of the slides and most of the videos. Other people participating on this or working on that, Professor Mercier, especially in the Department of Psychology, who helped us with some of the user studies to evaluate the system. And a number of students, summer students that I've employed in this project over several years. So I'm going to start by talking about interactivity and storytelling, whether games or not. So at the beginning of time, the storytelling was quite interactive. So you may have a small group at the campfire and one storyteller talking. The important point is that he or she would look at the audience and gauge their interest, maybe there's some sort of inclination, some sort of signs and feedback from them, and therefore modify the story. Okay. Once the writing was invented, then storytelling became a bit less interactive because now instead of listening to the storyteller, you'll be just reading the story maybe on the side of a building or something. The interactivity returned in the form of theater, especially in small theater, where you have the actors here showing a scene and the audience. And if the audience is small enough, again, there's a possibility for the actors to judge the interest or inclination or some sort of feedback so they can modify their story dynamically. Okay, once the television came, things became worse in terms of interactivity because now you're basically watching TV and you have no control over changing the channel or muting it and so on. Now we have computers. Notice that this is almost like a TV, except it has, in this case, mouse and a keyboard, which is great because that allows the audience to give input to the system. The question is, how do we use it? So as a recap, so what we would like to do ideally is to take a storyteller, clone them, right, and give every person its own storyteller. And then every story could be interactive because you have as many storytellers as there are members in the audience. The science is not quite there yet, so instead of cloning storytellers, we can clone computers. Okay, so we have a bunch of computers, so what we can do now, we can have one or several storytellers up here, right, who is going to somehow design a story, put it in the computer, and it can be interactive. Right? So the question is, again, because they do it ahead of time, who is going to control the story via computer runtime at the time when the story is happening? And that the answer is artificial intelligence or AI. So I'm from the Department of Computing Science, and so it's not really a technical talk, but it will be a demo of an actual system. In fact, two systems that we have developed that attempt to do that, which attempt to tell interactive stories via the power of AI and some input from the game designers. Okay. All right, so the hypothesis we're looking at here is whether knowing something about your audience allows you to tell a better story. Okay. Furthermore, I'm going to say that we're going to focus on fun and perceived agency. So we're not sure quite how to evaluate quality of the story per se. However, we're going to evaluate the quality of fun and how much of a control a person perceives when they're in interactive storytelling as an audience. Okay, so the first system I'm going to talk about is called Passage. Right? So player-specific stories via automatically generated events. And the idea here is he observes the player. So this is in the context of a video game, right? So the player's playing a video game, you observe them, you model what kind of player they are, and then you modify the story accordingly. And then you just repeat this whole loop. Okay? So from a flowchart perspective or graphic perspective, you have a player here, they're interacting with the system, with their game controller, or mouse, keyboard, whatever, connect, Sony Move. And you have the player model here being, so the actions are being interpreted to update the player model. And you have an encounter manager which releases the small chunks of story called encounters. So what are those encounters? They're simply a sequence of events involving the player. Right? And each encounter allows the player to play through it in potentially more than one way. Right? So there may be one branch to an encounter which is very good for somebody who likes fighting, and one branch which is good for somebody who likes collecting items, and so on. Okay. So the way we model a player is inspired by work of Robin Loss. And so these are the game types, player types for regular RPG games. Role-playing games, you have power game, and type fighter, tactician, and so on. Okay. And this is sort of the attributes, or what they enjoy. Okay. So what we're going to do is that we're going to select 5 subtypes, 5 of those. So power gamer, tactician, storyteller, method actor, and fighter. And the way we're going to represent model is by increasing or decreasing these bars. So the higher the bar, is the more inclination that particular player has to that state. So this person is very much of a fighter, a little bit less of a tactician, not much of a power gamer or method actor. Okay, so the first demo is going to be set in a game called Neverwinter Nights. Does anybody know what the game is? Okay, so it's an older game by BioWare, one of the most famous companies in RPG and storytelling games. And we use the engine and some of the art assets, but the story is, first I'm going to show a micro example, something very, very small, not a real game, but just to illustrate how this works. Okay. So what we have a library of those encounters, again, encounters are chunks of story, and there's going to be only 3 for the purposes of this example. There's going to be murder, knockdown, and a lost child. Okay, so what we're going to do, we're going to start with a knockdown encounter. So we have a character here. So they knock down this person. He drops a bag. We're going to grab that. And now the game thinks we're more of a power gamer. Not a thief, but a power gamer. Why? Because we collect items. We like items. Power gamers in RPG video games like items. Okay, so we did that, so this model got updated up here, so the bars changed. Now, what are we going to do next? So the system has to decide which encounter comes next, right? So this was a micro chunk called knockdown. What's going to happen next? The way it's going to be decided, okay, first of all, knockdown already happened, so it's not happening again. So we have to decide between murder and a lost child. And the way this is done, we look at what we know about the players, they're more of a power gamer, and we look at annotations that the author provided, the original author of the story provided about these little chunks, about these encounters. Right, so this murder encounter has 2 branches through it, and they appeal to different players, and actually 3. So it's in a lost child, you have several branches possible. So what we're going to do, we're going to basically, at a non-technical level, we're going to look at which of those little boxes resembles what we know about the player. And it looks, if you look here, the purple bar here, you know, this whole profile resembles this pretty well. Okay, that means there's a match, or it's the highest quality match. Okay, so it's going to be this branch of this encounter, and so the AI system is going to queue in the encounter lost child. Let's see how it works out. So we run around with our character, of course this is controlled character here. So there's a child here, we talk to her, Ellen says daddy, and I can't really see from this angle, but okay, I'm not the daddy I lost. Do you know where my daddy is? Maybe, what's his name? It says Perudo, we were going to the blacksmith shop. Okay, so we asked her, have you talked to a policeman? So now the model thinks that we're a bit of a tactician, because we came up with a tactic as to how the kid may go about finding their father, is to talk to some authority figure. So the game now thinks that we are a power gamer, a tactician, and not much of a storyteller. Why? Because we basically brushed her off at the end and said that's enough, right? So we don't really like storytelling that much. Okay, so there's a guy here, his name is Perudo, that's her father, okay? And we say we don't really care, but then he says, perhaps I can make it worth your while. Why? Because he thinks that we are power gamers, so we like rewards and items. And now our relation goes even higher up because we agreed to reunite the father with the daughter based on the reward. Okay. And they all now one happy family. Any questions so far? Okay. So in a nutshell, this is how this thing works. In a very simple way, that's how the first part works. So but the question is that any good? Right? And how do you evaluate this, right? So the anecdotal evaluation would be to write this entire game, give it to your friends, and say, hey, how do you feel about it? Right? But that wouldn't be quite publishable. And since our job is to publish things, we had to do more than that. So we wrote a version of a Little Red Riding Hood story, and we recruited 114 players from the university. They were mostly female, 2/3 female, and they were fairly young, so mean age 19.5. And I'm going to spare you the details, but the bottom line is that the stories which were generated in this fashion by modeling a player and then selecting beats dynamically were more fun than static stories with this much confidence. It's 93% confidence, right? So it can't be, there's a 7% chance that this is a fluke, that this finding is a fluke, right? And there's 93% chance that our results reflect on how things are. That's all we can tell about this part, right? So we have a system, and it seems to be fairly good at making things more fun by having these dynamics. Okay. First, we need stops there. So we moved on to part 2, which is increasing agency. So this was the first part was about optimizing fun. You're trying to make a story more fun to people, right? And the way we were judging fun in the previous study, we actually had them, after they played it, we had them fill out a little survey, where they had to report how much fun they had in that 45 or 30-minute story. Right? Okay. And of course, they didn't know what they were playing. They didn't know if they were playing our version or a static version. So we didn't want to bias them in any way. Okay. So here we're going to talk about agency. And what is agency? It's a sense of having influence on the course of experience. Okay. And why is that even important? So part of the motivation comes from studies in psychology. So for instance, Larson says a generalized sense of control is important to well-being in daily life. Right? These fellows here, Bandura and Seligman, say that people become inactive and depressed if their actions cannot affect what happens to them. Okay, so maybe that's a good thing to try to optimize somebody's feeling of control, how much they can influence the experience. Right? So an interactive story, unlike a TV show or a movie which you're watching or a book you're reading, right, which is on paper and a regular book I'm talking about, right? Okay, there you don't really have much control because when you're reading, it's printed, it's published million copies, and you just have one of those million copies. So here we're playing a game, so it doesn't have to be like that. It can be, but it doesn't have to, because you can interact, okay? So what we're going to look at is at the ability, we're going to increase the sense of somebody's agency as they play our game in the context of being able to interact with it. Okay. So the way that stories are often represented in this kind of interactive medium is by a story tree or a game tree, right? You start somewhere here, you move here, and so on, right? And so you make decisions. So one example of that is choose your own adventure books. So here what you have a story states, it's where you are in a story. You have instructions from the author. So this says, if you decide to go downstairs, turn to page 106. You decide to climb out of the window, jump to the roof, and find your way down from there, turn to page 108. Okay? So the audience decision as you read this book is to flip to the page however you feel. So this is an example of human computation. There's no computer, right? It's just pages of paper, but they have instructions for you. Right? So, of course, this has been attempted many times in video games. So this is some examples, some iconic titles, and there are many, many more. Right? So this represents millions of dollars invested. Probably actually each of them represents millions of dollars invested, let alone collectively. Right? So this is some big titles. There's Fallout, there's Fable 3, there's Fallout 3 here, Mass Effect. There's a lot of titles from BioWare, but not just. There's Bethesda, Softworks, and so on. Okay. So and if you look at that, these guys don't just spend money, because they have money, but they actually try to make it a selling point, right? So for instance, in Fable 3, the box art, or the selling point for the game, is that, what does it say? Your choices as a ruler will lead to consequences felt across the entire land. In Dragon Age Origins, there are no easy choices. So you have complexity in your moral choices. Right? Okay. So what we're trying to do here, we're trying to develop a computational system which will increase the feeling of agency by modifying something at runtime, as the player plays the game. So the system is going to live inside your Xbox, inside your PlayStation, your Wii, your iPhone, whatever platform you're using. It is going to work as you're playing the game. Okay. And as it executes these decisions, it's going to give you, hopefully, the sense that you're controlling the story. Okay. So now, one possibility is that we just find some good fixed game tree, package it in a box, sell a million copies, and everybody feels agency by playing that game. So that will be kind of ideal outcome for the industry, not so ideal for us, but as researchers. Well, fortunately, it turns out to be not the case, and here's some argument why not. So this is the reviews by two professional reviewers of a game called Fable 3. So this was a big hit, last year, I think it came out? And so Tom McShee at GameSpot says, the lack of choice in how the main quest plays is disappointing. Lack of interesting world choices until the end. However, if you look at Chris Boutillier at Extreme Gamer, another professional reviewer, he says, interesting player choices. Fable 3 doesn't waste any time putting you in a hot seat to make some life-changing decisions. So the same content, the same game, played by two different professional game players, reviewers, result in very different opinions. Okay. So it looks like one size doesn't quite fit all. Now, it could be maybe this Tom from GameSpot, which is a grumpy guy who never feels any agency, he's like perpetually depressed or something, right? Okay, but now this is a game of Infamous, and he says you have a choice in how the story plays out, which gives you a strong connection to the events, sucking you further into the world. Powerful moral choices, the same guy. Okay, so content clearly matters. So it's important what you have, and to make the most impact, you need to vary that based on who is playing your game. So that's basically what I said. So one size doesn't fit all. So we don't have this magic content we just put in and everybody feels agency. Right? It looks like it's person specific. So therefore, we need some sort of system to put in your Xbox, which will try to learn something about you and modify the content. Okay. This actually has been done, just not on the computer. So this represents a regular RPG game. So these are 4 players here, right, and a cat or something on this side. This guy, or girl, I don't know, is a human game master, right? So they're actually running the world, they're running the events, they're running the story. And because it's such a small type company, he or she collects information from the player, just by observing them, by looking at what they want to do in the story, are they about to fall asleep, are they excited, what are their actions, and they can modify the story dynamic. So basically, in one line, we're trying to create a computer version of this person. Okay, and put them in every box. So when you go to your favorite retailer, there will be that person in each of those boxes. All right, so to measure that, one question is how do we measure agency? And we come back to our friend surveys, and we can actually use a survey by Klimt. That's a psychologist, and this survey has been validated, meaning that a bunch of statistical voodoo has been applied to demonstrate that it actually has some validity. It's not just a bunch of questions, but they're validated questions. So we're not going to reinvent it, we're simply going to grab that and use it, because that's been validated. That's actually a lot of work to do. Okay. So there has been some related work. So I'm just going to, in fact, there's much more than I can present in one slide. Since we're short of time, I'm going to summarize it in a very abridged fashion. So McGurk, Brian McGurk and company in 2006 done something which was along the lines of guiding players away and trying to convince them to a particular course of action. Unfortunately, there was no human study. Right? Roberts and company and other guys done some other things, but again, there was no AI. Right? It was a small study and one attempt each. So the reason I'm presenting is that maybe somebody already done it. Then why waste money and time and do it again, right? Why not just grab it and use it? So I'm arguing that this has not been done before we started on this. So we know how to learn something about the players. We have our colorful diagram, which we can use. So we can borrow it from the previous system. Right? But that was about fun. Now we need to connect fun to agency so that we can use this system here. So we're going to use the model, okay, and we're going to select to maximize agency. And I'm going to describe how it happens. Okay. To connect fun to agency, we're going to use this trick, which you can think of maybe as a human fallacy here. People, when they make a decision, at least to a desirable outcome, they feel good. They feel like, wow, I made a wise decision. I could have done something else, but I was wise and I was smart. Right? I had agency, I had control, and I selected wisely. On the contrary, if they have the same amount of control objectively, but they make a bad decision, at least an undesirable outcome, they say, the odds were stacked against me, I really didn't have a choice, I didn't have any agency. So we all tend to do it to various extents. And this has been studied extensively in psychology. So since we know how to optimize fun, how to make something more desirable, we're going to link that to agency. So we're going to select, we're going to modify the game in the background as the player is playing it, so that what they're getting is hopefully more enjoyable to them. Right? And therefore, using this trick, they will feel that they had more agency. Okay. So effectively, we're working in a similar way to previous system. We're optimizing their enjoyment. But because of that, and because we're still leaving them choice, they're going to feel, yes, I had a choice, it led to enjoyable consequences, therefore, I had good agency, I'm wise and smart. That's basically the idea here. All right, so we represent this as a complicated structure, and skip that. But the important part is the reason I grayed this out is that the system in the background is going to remove parts of the story. Of course, you will know that as a player, right? Because basically, if you're somewhere running around through this part of the story, it's going to remove some things. Right? Unless you play this game several times, you wouldn't even know that this ever existed necessarily. Okay. So one possibility here is to evaluate what the players want and simply remove the less important parts or less enjoyable parts. So if we think the player decision is in triangle in here, and they can go left or right, make one choice or the other, and we think that this choice will give them a joy of 120, whatever units they are, and here's a joy is 100 units of joy. So we say, okay, well, forget that. Just get rid of this 100, right? Just gives them the branch which has more joy. But then is it really a player decision? If we don't give them a choice, it may be very enjoyable, but it becomes completely linear experience now, potentially enjoyable, But again, remember, we want to keep the choice and keep it enjoyable. We need these two ingredients. We need the choice and we need fun. Then they'll feel they have agency. Okay. So we're going to put this back in and we're doing something smarter. Right? So we're going to increase our tree, our game graph. So we have those two things here. Now we're also going to give author control. Right? Because authors are good at telling stories. We don't want a computer to do everything. Right? So the author can say, well, if you made a choice to go left at this part, then you should be going into this sub-area of the story, or possible story. Okay? But that's not quite enough, because we're not modeling play here. We're leaving everything to the author by doing that. So the final version is the author still has some control. They can say, if you went left, you either get this or this. If you went right, you either get this or that. Okay? The question is, which of those two sub-areas you're going to go to? And that's a system inside this E diamond that's going to do that. So there's some terminology which I'll skip. It's not important. So we implemented this. I'm going to show a video. The projector is kind of off this side. The down is good. So your character is on the right, and that's just your fellow classmate in this academy, some medieval type environment. So here your choice, this is a Dragon Age environment. Okay, so I'm going to select the swap the trading place for the real ones, and the game now thinks I'm more of a power game. Why? Because I care about items, in this case blades. Another choice is coming up. So we're going to say, to save many, some must be sacrificed. So the game now thinks we are more of a tactician, because it's a tactic, right? It's something to do with strategy or tactic, basically problem solving via some decisions. So normally as you play this game, you wouldn't see this box with the bars. I'm just showing it because I want to show you guys what's happening behind the scenes here. Okay, another choice coming up. Right, so he's going to say, I would enjoy everyone listening to every word I say. The storytelling inclination went up. Clearly this guy likes telling stories. So there's a rebellion within the school, within this academy. And so your friend is standing next to you. This guy is going to step forward, address the recruits or members of the academy, basically going against the authority. And they open a run to the kitchen, the rebels. The principal, on the other hand, is going to take whoever is loyal to the Empire and run off to the office to call for the Imperial Dragoons. We didn't have voice actors, that's why there's no voiceover. It's just text. Okay, so this is the leader of the rebels. So I'm cutting some parts of the game just to condense it into something viewable. And so here it turns out there's some secret documents we need to retrieve. The rebels got hold of one, but they don't have the other one. So we can decide to help them. And there's many ways of doing that, helping them. And how we're going to help them also tells the machine something about us. Okay, so here, I'm going to say, there is option. I suppose I could get some equipment from the armory. So power game inclination went up even more because more equipment, more items. Okay, here we actually confirmed our resolve to do that. So power game, as you notice, went way up. So the game really thinks we're a huge power game. And it's going to use that to select some of the next events. Again, this is a breached version, and the real version, there's more happening between these episodes. I'm just splicing them together. Okay, so we're going to run away from this, and as soon as we run off, the Imperial Dragoons show up, and they're going to go deal with the rebels. So we escaped with this document. So we come out somewhere in Dragon Age land, and we're going to take a look at what we've got. So the document actually going to review a little bit about the background, its reputation problem, and how evil the Empire is. And then our brother shows up. Yuri knows that we align with the rebels. Now we can do a bit of action. The monster. These guys have no fear. Okay, now the choice, so you can intimidate is 2 on 1 monster, leave while you can, right? And game believes that we're a storyteller by doing that. And I'm going to talk a little bit about these annotations later. But the game updated our model from this choice. So the monster actually ran off, fortunately for us. Okay. So we're going to come up to the victim, or so we think. It's a wizard, and he's unhappy about our heroics. So our brother is quite impressed by his own doing, since he's an imperial accountant. Right? And it turns out that the beast wasn't quite the beast. Right? This actually was helping us. Okay. There's going to be a little bit more stuff here, but it turns out that the beasts were actually not the beasts, that they were good, and the Empire turns them against itself so that they have an enemy to fight against and ignite them and so on, to be needed. So they're actually going to help the wizard here. I'm going to skip this little bit. But the important part is what's going to happen next. Right? The system now has decided, it knows something about us, it knows we are very much of a power gamer, quite a bit of storyteller, a little bit of tactician. Okay? So the way it's going to decide is going to look at possible next events, and it's going to decide, it's going to make one critical decision, whether the rebels occupied our uncle's place or they did not. Right? So that's the question. Should they occupy or not? So the way it's going to make that decision is a computer, right? It has to crunch numbers. So the way this works, if the rebels did not occupy and we helped them in the academy, then we're going to be in jail. If we did not help them in the academy, then there will be a duel with a captured rebel. So it knows which one of the two, right? Because it knows whether we helped or not. Okay. However, if the rebels did occupy, then they'll tell us to come no further. And then, of course, if we help them, they're going to be with us and they're going to try to convince us to help them take over the village. However, if we were against them, then a big fight is going to happen right away. So within each of those big blocks, the system knows, the author already specified what's going to happen, left or right. The only choice left to the system, to the artificial intelligence, is whether it's the left big block or the right big block. Right? Okay. And the way we're going to go about it is by crunching numbers. So we know we have the rebels, that's the blue choice. Right? So it's going to be either the left branch here. How do you do it? No. All right, well, maybe it's actually more visible. Okay, so it's going to run our little colorful bar model here, compute a bunch of numbers. It knows we're a power game and a bit of a storyteller. And it's going to come up with a bunch of numbers by matching this to this. But it's also going to look whether what could have happened, shown in gray here, is going to affect our joy or our enjoyment here. Okay. So let's say you're going to follow this guy. The author is going to put numbers at 0.9 saying that if you're following the left path, you have a 90% chance of suspecting there would be something else. And if you play video games, you often, in their choices, they often make it obvious that it could have gone the other way as well. Okay, and so on. So we're going to take those numbers into account as well. So even though this right branch is not happening, we're going to put a number there saying that there's 80% chance that you would have seen that. Okay, and there's more math happening, but the important part is the number is actually going to increase. So instead of 390 being they're going to get higher. They're going to get to 646. On the right side, we're going to compute the same, use the same procedure. Okay. Look at foreseeability of the other branch. And get a number there. So now it's 646 versus 400. 646 wins. That means the system is going to go to the left area here. That means the rebels will not occupy the uncle's estate, his house. Okay, so I'm going to play just a bit of the video to see what happens. So the uncle meets us there. He's in a good spirit, playing with good humor. We try to kind of throw him off balance, but that doesn't do anything. Now he learns that we help the rebels, and we know what's going to happen. I already talked about it. He's going to put us in jail. So we're executing the left sub-branch of that big left branch. Okay, so we're in jail now, and here's a captured rebel that they got from the academy. And he says, they told me that I was going to face you in a duel. Okay, so that's this 80% foreseeability of the other branch. Right? So the other branch was, if we actually did not help the rebels, if we helped the principal at the school, instead of us being in jail, there would have been a public duel where we would have had to fight the captured rebel. Okay. So now we're aligned with the rebel, and we're going to get out of the cell, and now to poison the uncle. was talking to us, he was sleep a drug, and the drug will make him obey whatever we ask of him, so we can take over the town. Okay. Now people will be sneaking into the kitchen, so there's a bit of a geeky humor here, where we're going to go explore the kitchen. Because people have been sneaking in and stealing supplies from the kitchen, there's a bunch of traps right here. So we're gonna very effectively maneuver among them, get to the wine rack, which is right up here. Okay, the guy magically is already in the kitchen. So now we're gonna put the drug into a wine bottle. We did that. The uncle comes, he's very drunk. I don't know how he avoided all the traps himself, but somehow he did. So he comes in, gets it, drinks out of it, without moving the cork. But that's just a detail. That's special skill the uncle has. Now, we were hiding in the corner, so we're going to come out and talk to him. He's a bit surprised to see us here. We're the Jake character. We asked him to dance. Because he now is drugged, he obeys everything we say, so he's going to dance for us. And now we're going to submit a more serious request to give us the town, and we also require that he announces us as a successor right away, and so he does. So it basically says that we, the characters, are going to be the ruler of this little town. Everybody is happy about it. Okay, so the game actually continues for quite a bit longer. I'm going to cut it here. Right. And we implemented this. That actually took a while. And of course, once we're done with this, this AI system controlling this. Can we kill the Trumpians? Okay, so we recruited 141 players this time. They were 38% male, not individually, but collectively. And the mean age was 19.4. And so again, there's quite a bit of actually experimental design went into that, but I will not show the details here. The details are published at the conference this year if you're interested. But the important part is that the story, if the system's turned on, if the AI system is running, people feel the sense of agency more than they do when they play system when it's not actively selecting events. So turning it on results in the feeling of more agency, and we know this with 96% confidence. So there's a 4% chance that our finding does not correspond to reality. It's just a fluke, right? That somehow those 140 people were weird and whatnot, and just that so happened. So it's a fairly strong result by psychology standards, 96%. So now we know how to do both. We know how to maximize fun, or optimize fun, or increase fun, and we also know how to increase agency. We have two separate systems. One does the fun, the other one does agency. So of course, what will be interesting to do, and it's a future work, is to try to have one system which addresses both. Right? So we would like to target fun and agency simultaneously. Another interesting detail would be to look at the effects of survey on fun. So we use two different surveys, two different instruments to evaluate the players' feeling of fun. And the first study, we got results for fun. In the second one, we didn't. Which you can say, well, that's not a problem, because in the second study, we actually didn't try to target fun. We tried to target agency, and we got an increase there. It would be nice to get both fun and agency increase in the same system, and we currently don't have that. Another suspicious point, you may say, or something which needs work, is all this annotation, all these numbers. Where does it come from, right? How do we know that this decision indicates players' power game inclination? Sometimes it's obvious, right? If they collect items and power-ups and level up eagerly, well, they're probably a power gamer. But some things are more subtle. It's not always clear one action should contribute to power gaming inclination, or storyteller, or tactician, or maybe to several at the same time. So what would be great is to learn the player typing, how to cast a player into one of the molds or increase the inclinations by either just looking at game traces or also looking at how human game masters operate. Maybe interviews them or maybe just observes the traces of their games. It would be nice to get these numbers automatically. I also mentioned this foreseeability. If you're taking this branch in the story, what are the chances you're going to guess that there was another branch? There was like 80%, 0.8, and 0.3, and 0.9 numbers. Where does it come from? Well, they come from human design right now. So when we make this story, we make this experience, we have to put these numbers in. Now, we don't know if they're right or not. So it would be nice not only to verify them, but also to automatically gather them, so we don't have to create all those numbers by hand. There's also somewhat different ideas that it actually doesn't matter what the content is. As long as it can create a certain type of emotional trajectory, let's say a roller coaster where it's intense, and then you catch a breezer, and it's intense again, as long as there's some sort of, or maybe it's a single, everything builds up to a single climax, and then there's some sort of resolution, whatever story arc or intensity curve you take. Maybe all that matters is the shape of that curve. So this idea was adopted by Valve in a game called Left 4 Dead. So in Left 4 Dead, if you guys played it, there are zombies attacking you, waves of zombies, and you fight them. Right? You're going to try to survive. So the ways they modulate those zombies to introduce them in a game is by trying to understand where you are on that emotional curve. Are you really worked up? Are you intense? Are you scared? And then they give you a sinusoidal type curve, like a roller coaster. It's emotional high and emotional low. And they modulate the zombies to keep you on that roller coaster the whole game. So it doesn't even matter what's the context. As long as you keep on that curve, they think you'll be happy. So that's a hypothesis. So perhaps we can pursue that a bit more. Right? There's also this idea that if you make a good deed in a game, it may persist in a positive way into real life. Right? Some people believe it, some don't. But there are people at UBC Okanagan who actually want to use our system, which I've shown here, Dragon Age system, in examining that, formally running a user study on that. And of course, it would be interesting to commercialize this technology. So what you see in the two games, one Neverwinter Nights and one set on Dragon Age, these are research prototypes. The first one is about half an hour long if you play it all the way, single play. The second one is probably 45 minutes or so. I only showed about 13 out of 45. But if you were to play the whole game, it would be about 45 minutes. Now, they exist in our lab. They don't exist out there in the real world. So if I were to take this, I think they could, with their amount of resource and experience, they can probably do something much more interesting than what we did with this. Okay, so in conclusion, we were able to select the story content dynamically, and by that we were able to increase the feeling of fun and the feeling of agency, and we have these two systems to support it. So I'm going to read this little cartoon here. As you journey along the path, you meet an old man. It tells you that modern neuroscience has proved that all the actions and decisions are mirrors and machinations of a predetermined universe, and the concept of free will is not but a comforting illusion. If you agree with this hypothesis, turn to page 72. If you disagree, turn to page 72. Thank you. If you have any questions, I'm ready to try to answer them. Yes?
So those two scenarios you have built, and you were given access to Dragon Age and Neverwinter Nights to make them work. Do you know what BioWare uses at the moment for those games? How similar your system is, or different your system is to what they use?
Yeah, so the question was the technology we use in these prototypes, how similar or different it is from technology BioWare uses. Partially they're very similar, so the tools for scripting, the tools for authoring cutscenes, and all the environments, we use their tools, the one they publicly released. So we didn't have any special access to their tools. Anybody who has copies of these games could have done what we've done, right? And however, the technology which we have, which models the player, all this bar increase and calculations, is done with their tools, but they don't do it themselves, right? So we build it on top of their tools.
Okay.
They just tend to run a fairly basic dialogue tree,
Yeah.
entirely procedural without multi-aware.
Right, so they have dialog tree, which we also use here as well, but we annotate that with all the updates to the model. And then we
You
have,
kind of cut it based on certain things.
that's right, that's right. Yeah. So we use their tools, but we use something on top of that as well, implemented within that engine, right? Right, so we don't have to call some cluster of computers on the side. It's all running within your copy of Dragon Age or within your copy of Neverwinter Nights. Right? Doesn't require any special equipment, nothing. Any other questions? Yes?
Have you looked at all at basing some measurements off of the actual actions taken as opposed to dialogue choices? Because the way players actually behave in actually approaching a problem in the game might be a little bit more accurate way to measure those tendencies, I'd say.
Yeah, this is a good point. So the point was, can we also update the model from actions, not just from dialogue selections? And the answer is definitely yes, we can. We're not doing it in this particular prototype, I don't think, but we can.
It happens in the first prototype, not the second.
Yeah, so in the Neverwinter Nights version, the one with Little Red Riding Hood, we do that. But in the Lord of the Borderlands, we don't do it right now, but we could. Yes?
A lot of games are often, choices between good and evil. So in a system like that, somebody that consistently chooses evil choices would get more evil content, less good, or that's how it would work.
Yeah, so I think it depends on how they pursue their evil inclination, right? If they pursue it in a fighting way, they'll get more fighting content. If they pursue it in a, say, power gamer ways, they'll get more power gamer type content. So it's less related to whether you want to play evil or good, but how you play it. So it's a bit more detailed than just two good versus Paragon versus Renegade or something like that. Yeah, that's a good question.
How difficult would it be then though to go and add something in addition to the player type, add something to the kind of story, add a metric to the kind of story that they're playing? So you have, say, the Paragon and Renegade meters, and you also kind of trim the options based on that because the player made a decision about what kind of story they want to play.
Yeah, so we can, in our model, we right now have 5 dimensions, this power gamer and fighter and all that. We can add another dimension. So the inclination to the dark or light side or Paragon Renegade. And then, again, the approach which is standard, it will work as well because all we need to do now, instead of matching 5 bars, we'll have to match 6 bars. Right? Or if you're maintaining Paragon and Renegade as two independent things, like Mass Effect does, then you would have to add 2 bars, right? Renegade inclination and Paragon inclination. Yeah, so, yes.
So every time you do an action, like out of your power gamer, it would only increase power gamer? There's not an actual system in place to go, oh, well, it could be
No,
storytelling.
you can decrease it. Yeah. You
Well,
can
I mean, like, does it do both categories simultaneously? Would it go, oh, you like storytelling, oh, you like power gaming, I don't know which, and just up them until they can verify? Or they just pick one and say that must be it?
No, you can update several dimensions at once,
Okay.
right? So you can see 2 bars go at the same time, and then the 3rd bar go down at the same time, or
Okay.
stay at it. So basically, arbitrary number of updates from a single choice.
Okay.
Yeah, yes?
So the way I understand this, like the Bethesda games, specifically like Oblivion and Skyrim,
Right.
they try to base your character development on your actions. So they're what you're actually doing in the game is influencing the skills you have in the game. And you're basically applying that to the actual storytelling, right?
Yeah,
But with a completely different system to do so.
that's right.
It's very interesting.
Yeah, that's right. I think these are complementary, actually, you can do
Yeah.
both, right? Yes?
So you're designing this to be played again and again, or is it one story like you'd be reading a book?
You can do both, right? So the idea here is that we would increase the feeling of fun or agency on a single playthrough. Right? And that's what the study showed. These people were playing at single time, and we were measuring it of a single playthrough in that, right? So, but if you were to play it again with a different style, like for instance, you say, okay, now I'm going to be more interested in items versus storytelling, right? You are likely to get a different content. But then our goal was to increase the feelings of fun and agency with a single playthrough, without requiring people to play several times. Any other questions? Okay, thank you again.